once again. Pizza's okay? Alright. Stop by the student reading room if you guys want some free pizza because they left after class. Okie doke, so we were talking about some just kind of foundational concepts of leisure. We left off on Tuesday talking about access, equity, and justice. Kind of the sense of, all right, if the United States National Park System kind of led all of humankind as of about 1916 when it was created in terms of trying to make sure that everybody had genuine and meaningful access to the outstandingly rare or globally unique natural resources, recreation opportunities, all of these things, at least in America. And we'll see in our history section coming up that that wasn't really true for most all of humanity, for most all of humanity's history. The previous several 100,000 years following the emergence of modern Homo sapiens. So, that's kind of different and short-lived across the span of human history. But what that means for us today is that, folks, now that we've had about a century and 7 years, to kind of hammer out the idea of what public national parks could look like, how they can serve as benchmarks ecologically, how they can serve as core refugia for wildlife species that have to be, hunted kind of everywhere else, have to survive habitat degradation, strip mines, and high-speed, limited access highways, and all this stuff, kind of everywhere else, at least in national parks. All of that stuff be held out, at least as much as possible. And aside from the occasional well-meaning or just really dumb family trying to seatbelt a baby bison calf into their minivan because it gets separated from the herd and they're concerned. Generally, it's like maximum quality habitat. Generally, it's maximum quality recreation opportunities. And we've been talking about leisure as, well, at least in the old Roman sense, it's license, it's discretion. We'll see that the Latin root for the word recreation deals with recreation, sort of rebirthing yourself, reinventing yourself, recharging yourself from all of the things that are sort of clawing away for your dopamine, your attention, your low-grade excitement and anticipation. Every time your phone goes off in your pocket, every time that little notification slides in or somebody slides into your DMs, or you get a super like on whatever, dating app people are using these days. Like, all of this is designed by neuroscientists hired by a lot of these technology companies to grab at you, to get your attention, to try and form a habit. Because some percentage of the people who have the habit formed are going to spend a little bit of money. And when you multiply that tiny percentage of people spending the money, a tiny percentage of the time, across billions of people with smartphones, well, we get some trillion-dollar companies like Apple and Microsoft and so forth. So, we left off with access, equity, and justice, and just kind of seeding the idea of, it's not automatic that everybody's got a fair shot at a decent hunting trip, no pun intended. So there's a little bit of work to be done, sometimes and in some places, on just making sure that everybody can get to the table that wants to be at the table. And making sure everybody has sort of a fair and honest conception of how safe it is to be at that table, to extend the metaphor a little bit. That's kind of where I left things off. Let's continue forward now, talking about kind of the stages of leisure. And we want to think about this kind of from the perspective of, being future park rangers. All right, we're going to talk about some examples of video games and trips and different sports and outdoor activities and stuff like that. But we want to think about this from the sense of, okay, if I'm a park ranger at Giant City State Park, what kinds of recreation opportunities, what kinds of habitat am I managing relative to people doing an opportunistic kind of leisure. Just a real quick, like 90-second to 5-minute nibble of break time. Used to be a smoke break for 15 minutes every hour each day. Now it's a vape break. Hopefully nobody gets vapes. It's not very good for you, but it'd be stuff like walking your dog. Yeah? It's not a huge, like, fireworks going off kind of an event, but it's a chance to stretch your legs, get a little bit of fresh air, maybe meet some of your neighbors every once in a while. Just get some exercise and enjoy the outdoors a little bit. Here in Carbondale, at least, where we have, some reasonably forested areas like those managed by Green Earth Incorporated around town, a bunch of green spaces. Pretty cool stuff. We've got a prairie habitat restoration site. We've got some hiking trails, a couple of trails inside the Carbondale boundary where people trailer their horses in to ride. Not all small towns have that. That's pretty cool. But a 3 to 5 minute walk, just walking your dog as the rain is threatening or something like that, we'd call that opportunistic leisure. Not huge risk, not huge investment, not huge skill thresholds, like minimum skill checks that you gotta get over to be able to do the thing safely. Mobile games are designed for opportunistic leisure. So I don't know what people are playing these days. It used to be like back when I was a kid, Minesweeper. I don't even know if you know what that is, but Clash of Clans these days, Clash Royale, right? Supercell is a billion-dollar company because people can play a match in Clash of Clans or something like that over the course of 3 minutes, pinching a loaf in the bathroom. And every once in a while you buy more gems or crystals or magic hammers, or I don't know, whatever it is that people buy to power up their armies or whatever. And that's a thing. And that's a valuable enough kind of leisure that mobile gaming is a major multi-billion-dollar thing, and it didn't exist 15 years ago. Like, the Apple App Store is right about 15 years old. So this is a new thing. And this is also a new thing for park rangers. Because how many of you-uns, as they say in rural Pennsylvania, have ever played Pokemon Go? The Pokemans that dropped in 2016. Well, as it turns out, Pokemon Go is a geo-enabled thing, and they've gotten people to walk billions of miles in the pursuit of, I guess, hatching do they come in eggs? Okay. This is a thing. You guys have seen probably videos of the flash mobs of thousands of players at a time mobbing places like Central Park when an ultra rare or chase card like, I don't know, Mewtwo or Mew or somebody like that shows up. Like, people lose their minds. They walk out of their jobs to go try and find this thing because it might be a month or two before they even see or have a shot at another one. So, opportunistic leisure is bringing people into protected areas, places that we manage for habitat and ecosystem function and services and recreation, human uses, like Central Park, like campus here, and so on and so forth. In 2016, that year when Pokemon Go dropped, it was weird taking classes outside for like having a lecture session out by Campus Lake or something, because people would be like just edging over here to just like tap on a thing over here and try and catch it. And I couldn't spite him because I was playing too. Not like while I was teaching, but like I get it, So opportunistic leisure, we don't want to sort of look down our noses at that and be like, this is low quality recreation. This is people just like poking their finger at a screen and walking into traffic. We want to understand that this is a powerfully effective thing because it's so ubiquitous. You can just pull out your phone and have the internet at your fingertips and literally millions of games. So this is a thing. Also, in some public and protected areas managed for recreation, games like Pokemon Go or Ingress or Wizards Unite was built on the Pokemon Go engine for Harry Potter fans. That ran for several years. I think they shut down now. People were doing things like falling into caves and sinkholes and walking off of cliffs and dying playing Pokemon Go. And those stories didn't make the news as much as Pokemon Go becoming the fastest game to earn $1 billion in revenue, billion with a B, in a matter of months in 2016. Like, it got people to do things and actually hurt themselves on accident. But chasing that thrill, that hit of dopamine of, oh my gosh, I just got something that's super rare, or I just took over this gym again, and that was a hard battle, and why am I in the middle of the street while I'm doing this? Oops, kind of a thing. Park rangers, we didn't expect this. Niantic, the company that developed Pokemon Go, didn't call up the National Park Service and be like, hey, we're about to cause you some crazy search and rescue nightmares all at once, all of a sudden, and you're not going to have any idea what's going on, so here's the tip-off. They just launched the game. And it took them a period of years to do things like geofencing, so not putting on the map in certain restricted polygon areas Pokemon, like near train tracks, for example, so that people aren't wandering on train tracks and getting splattered by a train, and so forth. It took them several years to add those basic safety features. So park rangers got caught kind of flat-footed on that. They failed the perception check, so to speak. And sometimes, as a function of rapidly changing technologies, especially these days, we're going to get caught flat-footed to the extent that we're not out in front of this and understanding what our recreation users, whether they're more traditional, like hikers and backpackers, or a little bit less traditional, like Pokemon Go players, what's the motivation? Where is it going to bring people? What kind of behaviors and activities, what kind of awareness are they going to have? What kind of skills are they going to bring as they're in these environments? There is literally no reason that Pokemon Go can't collect rich and timely safety information. Your smartphone is packed with a 3-axis accelerometer, 3-axis gyro, 3-axis magnetometer, compass, a high-precision L1, L2 band GPS unit, a cellular connection, a light sensor, temperature sensors, humidity sensors, right? We know, or we can know, as app developers, exactly what kind of trouble and hazards people are wandering into as a function of our games. But there's not really much of an economic incentive to do that. We got to get the gem store up and running first, and then we'll try and keep our players alive. Make sense? So there's kind of an inherent conflict of interest when you're an app developer that puts park rangers in a difficult spot. Again, I'm not speaking down about games and mobile gaming and video games and stuff like that categorically. That's not the message, and it's not a useful message even if it were. Instead, we want to be aware of this stuff. Understand how people tick. Why is Pokemon Go interesting? If you're an interpretive ranger, tasked with helping people understand their connection, their presence, their location in an ecosystem, and a history and a culture around a place, like interpretive hikes at Giant City State Park that might take you to Stone Fort or any of the other archaeological sites, stuff like that. If you know Pokemon Go inside out well enough to communicate with your Pokemon Go players in your hiking group, you can roll that right in, right? This is not something to be afraid of or be irritated at. It's something to use and work with, in my opinion. So, the opportunistic stage is like just reading. Nobody reads the paper anymore. We don't even read blogs anymore. People, do you guys read news at all? Maybe? Daily Egyptian? All right. When you're punting a crunk in the restroom, leafing through the Daily Egyptian, that's opportunistic leisure, okay? And park rangers, we see not people punting crunks, except in very specific circumstances we'll talk about later in the semester. But we want to be aware of that. Cool. Our next stage of leisure is kind of the weekday, the couple hours long phase. That might be sitting down on the couch and playing a video game instead of a 3-minute matchup in something mobile. So these days the kiddies are playing, I don't know, Fortnite, Minecraft, Valorant, Destiny 2 before it sucked, right? Or going to the Student Rec Center and working on some problems at the climbing wall. So a problem is climber jargon for a difficult stretch of a pitch, a sequence of holds and locations on a rock or climbing wall where you sort of move from one to the next in kind of a set order because there's a limited number of ways to get from start to finish. Okay? So, weekday leisure as park rangers, absolutely, especially for, and this is going to be one of our key terms for the semester, in urban proximate parks. So back in the 1870s, starting in 1872, Congress started setting apart the big polygons on the map, the big squares on the map, like Yellowstone National Park, Yosemite National Park, Rocky Mountain National Park, Acadia National Park. We had, I don't know, a couple of dozen national parks set up by about 1920. Before Congress created the National Park Service, which is weird. We had parks before we had a park service. Think about that. The problems that could create. But those places were all real far away from settled areas back in 1872. It was like, maybe a couple of weeks by wagon to get to Yellowstone National Park. And then it was at least several days by rail to get to Yellowstone National Park. Because we don't have paved roads, we don't have highways, we don't have internal combustion engine cars until after the turn of the century following that. So we have a few people going to very large places, very, very low use density, number of people per square mile of park available. Back in the 1800s, makes sense. Our population was much lower back then as well. These days, all of those big parks have already been set aside. And we've cut rail lines and built airports near to, like the Jackson Hole Airport near Grand Teton, sees a whole bunch of private jet traffic for the world's rich to enjoy one of our national parks. We can access those places, but it's still kind of a big lift to get there. Like you're either buying a ticket or owning a private jet or driving for a day and a half to get to Grand Teton National Park from here. So kind of in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and accelerating since the 1990s, the Park Service and other organizations like that have really had kind of a big push to get protected areas not just closer to, so urban proximate parks, closer to big settled areas like suburbia, Chicagoland, stuff like that, but also designate sections, like historic sections, of Chicago, Cleveland, Ohio, Boston, and places like that as heritage corridors. They are protecting areas that don't look like parks, partially because so much of our rich American history is in urban places, but partially because urban places were the huge, the overwhelming majority, 95% plus, of where people live now. And so for some people, if they can't get to a Yosemite National Park easily and quickly, they're not going to get to a park. So you bring the park to them. And for those of you who like kids, I don't particularly. My wife and I are child-free by choice because, my God, can the world even handle more of us? But if you like kids, there are rangers in classroom programs with different state park organizations and the National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife, loves to do stuff like this, to get the park not only closer to people, but like right there in the classroom with people, helping teachers hit their, teaching objectives and stuff like that, and just being like a positive role model, a positive figure in these kids' mental landscape of, okay, so there's a big, cool, interesting world out there that I can go play around in. And that's something to aspire to and enjoy. Okay? Sorry, didn't mean to forget. Is that Overwatch? Yeah, okay, didn't mean to forget Overwatch. And now Overwatch 2, right? So, our weekday or multiple hours, but just in a single day, kind of afternoon or morning, half day kind of stage of leisure. this is a big one. This is the big one in terms of what people actually do. But in terms of what people aspire to do, what people are saving up money for, buying up the climbing gear, getting exciting. This is a D20 for tabletop gaming. Dungeons & Dragons, typically a 4-hour session of dice rolling, shiny math rocks, click, clack. Okay. What people are actually working towards is a weekend hunting trip, with a week-long hunting trip, right? Like, that's a lot more exciting than walking your dog. And that's something, at least with hunting, depending on the species that you're interested in or the tools that you're interested in using, it's tightly limited to a specific moment in the year or season of the year, and you get to build up anticipation the entire rest of the year. So there's this funny thing about human psychology in terms of enjoying stuff, seeing value in stuff, anticipating stuff, and forming habits around things. And ironically, mobile games have started to lean into this really hard. You'll recognize this pattern in those once we describe it for hunting. When you limit an activity that people want to choose to do,
yes.
When you limit it, that raises the perceived value and excitement and enjoyment of that activity a lot. Okay? This is called dopaminergic design. Now, whitetail season isn't limited to build anticipation in hunters. It's because we are almighty Nimrod these days with our advanced alloys and centuries and centuries of gunpowder chemical engineering and stuff like that, and now the sciences of ballistics and so on and so forth. We now have smart guns that can pull the trigger for you when the specific Coriolis effect of a long-range shot and the wind and the elevation and your heartbeat or your pulse moving the typically long gun in small but perceptible ways. Like, we have the technology, we can build it better, faster, stronger. We're so good at hunting that we have to limit hunting whitetails and fishing different kinds of sport fisheries to tags and creel limits and stuff like that, because otherwise we're going to completely destroy those populations, right? This is not a huge surprise to those of you who enjoy hunting. We're just really, really good at it, and so we got to limit ourselves to just enjoying it and not completely extirpating it, which is a fancy way of saying extincting by accident. Okay? So, mobile game designers working with marketing researchers and neuroscientists who study things like addiction figured out if you put a timer on a game where you can play, but in order to play that match, you spend some resource that you have. And when you run out of resource, you can't play another match until that resource fills back up. If any of you have played a game where you can play a round or a match or do a puzzle or make an attempt at something, some kind of a challenge in the game, and then there's a timer, and you can pay money to run that timer back down to 0, or you can wait. Anybody ever played a game like that? Yeah, so have I. I fucking hate it, but it works. I don't stop playing those games because that's how our brains are wired to work. It's the anticipation. It's being forced to wait that builds that anticipation. Sorry for using purple prose in class. All right, so back in the day, this was the World of Warcraft raid for those of you who like avoiding the cursed Daystar and its intensive UV radiation. Board games like Twilight Imperium. This is a game that can take 8 to 16 hours to play, and hours to set up and an hour to tear down. That doesn't sound like fun for a lot of people, but for fans of board games, living games, or legacy games like Gloomhaven, Twilight Imperium, Pandemic Legacy, other games like that, that longer term thing where your buddies might be over for the night or for the whole weekend, that sounds like a pretty good time. And sometimes for hunters, it's much the same thing. For some hunters, it's about the weekend. Some hunters don't even care, and this sounds like heresy, let's order exterminatus, on folks who go hunting and they don't really care if they see any whitetail, because it's just nice to have some quiet alone time up in a tree stand. Amen?
Yeah, I can see why he doesn't say that.
Now, they're not going to say no to bagging a trophy buck, of course, but sometimes it's just about getting away from all of this stuff and getting down into the holler where my cell phone doesn't reach. And I don't have to deal with just that itch of checking, oh my gosh, nobody swiped right on me. Woe is me. I am forever alone, okay? So, this, instead of going to the climbing wall for a couple of hours at the Student Rec Center, might be going to Jackson Falls Natural Area on the Shawnee National Forest to go climbing for the weekend. To bring a tent, bring maybe one or a couple of friends, bring a crash pad, some harnesses, some sport ropes, stuff like that, and see how many pitches you guys can full send, and so forth. Okay? That make sense? Alright, so what might you guys and gals add to the list for weekend scale leisure? What's something that you enjoy that's not up here? Because this is a pretty short list, necessary. Backpack, yeah. Kayak. Okay. So why is kayaking not an opportunistic thing for 3 to 5 minutes?
One, you have to hitch like the kayak onto the trailer. You have to have get paddles in the trailer, and you have to drive over where you're kayaking. Then you have to unhitch, and then you have to take them out. Like you have to undo the binding cords, and you gotta find the little portage where you go off of, and then you kayak for an hour. And then once you get back, you have to repeat that process again. So it adds a lot of time.
So for maybe a short weekend, you might spend more time in the load up, drive to, unload, and then the reload, drive back, unload.
We don't go very
and
far
the paddling. Yeah. Okay. That's the thing. There are physical logistics. There are physical distances to be traversed. Anybody else? Kayaking, backpacking. Anything else? Anybody ever go horseback riding? Yeah. That takes a hot minute to get rolling. Okay. Cool. So, weekend stage leisure might be any of these forest and outdoor recreation opportunities that you guys or activities, that you guys are identifying, but it also, for other people, might be stuff like going to the county fair. Anybody going to the Apple Festival this weekend? Over in Murfreesboro? All right. If you want to see Dr. John Groniger pick a banjo, go tonight. I think it's 7 p.m. They're the main stage show. That's right. He's kind of a big deal. All right? No joke. The Apple Festival draws 45,000 people a year for a period of hours, and some folks go multiple days and stuff like that. For folks who have boat-shaped voids that money sort of disappears into, called a boat, it's trailering your boat out to Crab Orchard or Wren Lake. Yeah, there's a bunch of boating action going on up there. And Wren Lake is a place that has hired a bunch of our forestry students over the years. It's a place to think about if you want to work locally, like next summer, stuff like that. So, up beyond weekend stage, we're getting into bigger scale stuff. So weekend, week-long stuff will kind of roll together. At the annual stage, we have the real diehards, the true believers in capital letters for whatever activity or subculture of leisure we're talking about. So for tabletop gamers, board gamers, we have things like Dragon Con, Gen Con. We have charity gaming conventions. There's a hacker weekend-long thing, but it's once a year, so we'll include that in the annual scale thing called Hack SI over at the Dunn Richmond Center coming up in November. There's going to be hundreds of people enjoying lots of free food and hacking together software, hardware, 3D printing stuff, and just seeing what sticks and what's interesting. Trying to break things to do new and interesting stuff with it. But a little bit closer to us in our familiarity here in forestry, the family vacation. You guys ever like load up into that? Used to be a station wagon, but now I guess like the crossover SUV and like suffer through like a week or two with your family, and come on guys, we're gonna refuse to be disappointed, and like long sleepless nights with both your parents and snore wars, bug bites and spiders in like these poorly maintained outhouses. I mean, what's not to like about the 2-week-long annual summer trip? Yeah, that's what I grew up doing. Clearly, I got into forestry. It must not have been all bad, right? So the idea here is sometimes this annual thing is once a year because it's affordable. Camping's pretty cheap as far as things go. It might be 10-15 bucks for a campsite even now in 2023 when everything is astronomically expensive, versus $200, $300, $400, $500, $600, $700 a night for a motel room nearby in that very same national park. So you can put together a couple of weeks in some beautiful places, go do some fun things, and actually have some time to kind of be there instead of be passing through there. It takes a couple of weeks to sort of ease into that dynamic. A longer trip is an important thing, and it's difficult to access that same set of values with anything that's shorter. Okay, so in past years, the SIU Climbing Club, for example, has gone to the Red Rocks area right outside of Moab, Utah, and they go climb. They drive there in like, I don't know, 24, 26 hours, and then they have like 8 or 9 days in a row over spring break, and then they drive 26 hours back and start classes the next day, and it's a pretty excellent climbing trip. There are so many thousands of world-class climbing pitches around, like in the Wall Street area by Corona Arch, just outside of Moab, that you'd be kind of crazy if you're a climber not to have a trip like that at some point in your life. But trips like that tend to be, for most people, kind of a one-off thing. Like, okay, I've spent 1 or a couple of weeks at Comic-Con eating con food and I have regrets, or I spent 1 or a couple of weeks backpacking in Alaska, or 1 or a couple of weeks climbing in any of the many areas that are awesome for climbing, including Red Rocks around Moab, and so forth. It's like, for my next big adventure, let me try something else. Does that make sense? So, just by a show of hands, how many of you guys and gals have gone on some kind of an annual scale, like family vacation or, you know, trip with your friends kind of thing? Okay, most of us in the room, yeah? How many of you guys and gals have done the same trip, more or less? Maybe dates vary a little bit, or the roster of people going on the trip varies a little bit, but for the most part, it's generally the same group, and it's generally the same place, generally the same activities. More like a tradition than just a one-off. Okay, maybe half, 2/3 of us, all right? How many of us have been on annual trips that are explicitly one-off things? Maybe like a cruise, something like that, okay? Half or 2/3 of the class. So, this kind of makes sense. Most all of us have experienced some face of this. And a lot of the bigger national parks are going to fall in that this is our annual tradition as a family, or this is our big one-off trip as a family or friends group or solo or couple or whatever. And like, this is our one shot to see and experience and be in Yosemite Valley for a long week, something like that. And so we're going to go hard. We're going to go ham. We're going to be off the chain or off the chizzy or whatever. And that sort of posture towards what we're going to get out of this trip, our motivation for the trip, well, it has consequences for you and me as the park ranger. Because somebody who is there every year, and they've kind of been there, done that on most of the different hikes, most of the different waterfalls or geysers or whatever other outstanding recreational or natural features are present. And it tends to be more of a sedate, chill, and social thing instead of a go out and achieve and adventure and stuff like that. Kind of a thing where the one-off, one-timer folks are going much harder. So if you have a whole bunch of one-timers coming, that's going to mean something different for how you manage your trail network. You're going to want more longer, harder trails. If it's mostly a place where it's like the same 500 or 5,000 families coming every single year, more like a Wren Lake situation where you have, some summer homes kind of nearby that, some rental cabins nearby that folks come to every single year. We don't need high adventure trails near Wren Lake because folks aren't really there for that. They're there for the tradition and the people and so on and so forth. It's a nice family reunion kind of a setup. So, people's motivations are strongly affecting and even just driving, determining, setting. Like, how big is my trail network going to be? Is it going to be kind of a burly, rocky, rooty, hand-over-hand scramble kind of a trail network? Or is it going to be like a super chill, yeah, we could push somebody in a wheelchair down this trail pretty easily. And we're going to keep it real close to the visitor center. In fact, you will never not be inside of the visitor center on the short loop trail around it, where we have a whole bunch of landscaped native plants and stuff like that, maybe a little interpretive sign near each one. Maybe you've seen a hike like that. Okay, so again, people's motivations, sometimes people who are coming from thousands of miles away, are shaping what you're doing and installing and maintaining and protecting on site. That's a weird thing, and a little bit counterintuitive for us as foresters, because most of us get into forestry because we don't like dealing with people. We'd rather be out in the woods. Let's be honest. That's me. All right? Now, I don't hate you guys. I love being a professor. It's just everybody else sucks. All right, moving on. So the annual stage trip, we tend to see people going farther into more remote environments like this. In the annual stage, the once a year or once in a lifetime trip to a place, we tend to see much, much more investment. People are spending a lot more money to get there and to exist there, and a much higher reliance on services like concessions we talked about on class session 2 with definitions. So that annual stage tends to be more of a memory former, a more formative experience shaper than having the Hershey squirts and playing Clash of Clans. Okay? Big difference. Both leisure. Huge difference in ecological impacts, in value perceived, in, again, those facilities and stuff like that, okay? Finally, in the sort of lifelong leisure era or phase or stage, we have kind of that retirement, or these days we got to include the FIRE people, not Fire Festival, but financial independence, retire early folks who are eating peanut butter and jelly and saving like 80% of their income. Okay? So these are the van lifers who sell their house and live out of a vehicle they've converted into a camper van, or folks who buy the $80,000 or $100,000 RV, right? The 80-foot essentially tour bus with satellite and hot showers and shiatsu massaging chairs, I assume. I don't know what those people do. But no judgment, whatever. These are the folks that are living full-time in national parks. These are the only folks other than the rangers and the concession staff that live full-time in parks, because typically there's like a 2-week limit on how long you can reserve an RV pad at a major national parks campground. So you're there for 2 weeks, and then when your 2 weeks is up, you back out the RV and pull it across to the other site at the other major campground in that national park, and you set up there for 2 weeks, and you're there at the national park for a couple of months at a time, just bouncing back and forth between RV pads. Okay? So this is a whole other set of needs, demands, motivations, wants, ecological impacts, habitat interactions for folks who are at this place full time instead of kind of parachuting in for an afternoon or parachuting in for a long week, something like that. It's different when you've got like the tiki torches posted in your yard, you know, your spot in this major RV campground area, and you're there for a while. Like you roll out the fake grass mat and, you know, you learn the neighbors' last names and you wave as they drive by on their little golf cart that they trailered in behind their 80-foot RV. Like, this is living for some people, you know? Like if you grew up in a family where the word toy hauler is part of your vocabulary, you get this, you know? Like, this is part of your vibe or mood or life way. And for the rest of us, it's like, my God, how did you afford that? Anyway, whatever, just like sell meth or something, whatever. But this also has kind of a symbiosis with being a park ranger in the sense that if you've ever stayed at any major national parks developed campground, you're almost 100% likely to have at least been nearby the campground host who is a volunteer. They're not getting paid to run that campground, or at least be a responsible presence on that campground, so that the rangers can like do the running and the maintenance of the campground. This is the person that you call when you have a flat, and the park service needs to have some kind of point of contact for basic human services inside the campground. So they give that person with their 80-foot RV a 6-month spot instead of a 2-week spot and say, hey, you can set up here, you just need to have kind of the campground phone on your hip whenever you're around, and you know, if there's a noise complaint, you're the first line of defense. You know, go forth and tackle the meth heads. I'm kidding. They call them the law enforcement rangers for that. But it's not just about consuming national parks. It's partially about giving back to them and literally helping to run that part of a national park. And the way the Park Service, the way the federal government works, nothing works without volunteers like this, okay? So, with all of this said, this retirement era where you're typically flying to Hawaii to go see Hawaii volcanoes, or Kilauea, or Haleakala, which is no longer active, but some of the others certainly are. This is not something that most people are biting off to chew, except for a small and rapidly growing subculture of folks who are saying no to the 9-to-5 office job, saying no to the mortgage, and building their lives around accessing this, and all of the other parks, and all of the other lakes that Army Corps of Engineer manages. The United States Army Corps of Engineer manages more miles of created shoreline inside the continental United States than there are miles of natural shoreline around the edges of the United States. That's a lot of lakes. That's a lot of core campgrounds. That's a lot of core recreation rangers that most of us aren't thinking about yet, but maybe should. So, maybe you finish your forestry degree and you're like, okay, I could work for Weyerhaeuser, or I could work for the National Park Service, or what have you, or I could get a beater van and rip the natty old carpet out of it, throw a mattress in, and write timber stand improvement plans and work remotely for landowners all across the country, according to each state's tax breaks and laws for having TSI plans or conservation habitat plans for their fields and yards and acreage and stuff like that. And you could live full-time in national parks. More and more people are doing that. With the advent of Elon Musk's Starlink, which on the one hand really pissed off astronomers because those satellites were really bright and just blocking telescopes and just screwing everything up. And on the other hand, providing global broadband internet access globally in places where you didn't usually have internet access before. All of a sudden, people can work and do like full-time stuff, pulled off on the side of the road at Yellowstone, just like a couple of 100 yards from a bunch of bison. You're like writing your TPS reports from the movie Office Space. Okay? This is a thing, and with our gig economy and ubiquitous computing power, this is a thing. If you like working on a computer instead of being out with a tree harness and a pole saw, some folks really get into it. Okay, so this retirement stage stuff doesn't have to be just for retirement. I need to update these slides. That's no longer an accurate classification anymore. And besides, our Social Security fund is running out and none of us are going to be able to retire anyway. So, whatever. Let's end it right there a couple of minutes early for today before we get into classes of leisure. We'll just kind of leave with this stinger. Sometimes people are working pretty hard at their leisure, and that's counterintuitive, and most of the rest of us are easing our way through. Alright, see you next time. I'm here for questions. Are there any donuts left? If so, put a hurt on those. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.